Hi, and welcome to Vault Vampires in the World of Darkness, a panel about Vampire the Masquerade Winter's Teeth, the comic book series based on the iconic RPG. I'm Adrian Wassel, editor-in-chief of Vault Comics. I'm joined today by Syndee Barwick and David Dissanayake. If you're looking to connect and learn more about Vault, they hold all the answers. I'm also joined by Rebecca Taylor, series editor for Winter's Teeth, and creators Tim Seeley, Tini and Blake Howard, and Nathan Gooden, who managed to distill such a vast world of shadowy creatures into a chart-topping, critically acclaimed comic book series. So thank you all for joining me. We got a lot of folks and not a ton of time, but I thought maybe we could just do quick intros from each one of you, saying who you are and what you worked on in the World of Darkness Vampire the Masquerade comics. So Tay, maybe you can take it away. We can run through intros.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm Tay. I am the managing editor of Wonderbound here at Vault, but also I get to series edit Vampire. It's one of my few Vault titles and I absolutely love it. I've been series editing it from the beginning. I get to work with all these wonderful writers and artists and help put the whole book together and manage with our licensing team, who are also fantastic over at Paradox. And it's been a blast, and it's a blast because these guys are so wonderful. So listen to them more than me.
Excellent. Nate?
Hi, I'm Nathan Gooden. I did a series of covers for Vampire, and I did a lot of the vintage covers, beeline covers, and I also do the illustrations for the Anarch Tales written by Blake Howard, the amazing Blake Howard. Just a great opportunity that I was so excited to tackle, and I can't wait to keep going, honestly.
Awesome. And then Tini, Blake, you're up.
Yeah, I am Blake Howard. I'm one half of the writing team for Anarch Tales. I also get to write some of the Vampire the Masquerade game material that we put as back matter in some of our books.
I'm Tini Howard. If you know my name, you probably know that I write like X-Men books and a lot of other stuff, but I get to do this in Vampire and write the Anarch Tales with my husband Blake, which is amazing for me because I have been a Vampire the Masquerade fan over half my life at this point. Yeah, so being here is really surreal for me and really fun being a part of this team. So
excellent. And then that leaves you, Tim.
Hey, I'm Tim Seeley. I wrote the comic Hack Slash, and I write the book Money Shot for Vault as well. And I'm the writer on the Carmilla side of the Winter's Teeth story. Excellent.
Awesome. Thank you guys for the intros. I've got a bunch of questions for everybody. I think I'll kick things off with Tay, since you always have the kind of 30,000 foot view on the series. As an editor, you've run it all before. So creator-owned, licensed superhero series and events. But I think this is the first time you've done RPG to comics. Unless I'm totally mistaken, maybe you can correct me.
I think there was a few books way back in the day when I was at Archaea. I worked on a book called Hawken that was a gaming. I don't know if it was an RPG though, but yeah, I think this is my biggest certainly foray into the world of RPG licensed comics.
Well, what has it been like trying to obviously wrangle an amazing team, but just kind of distilling such a massive world with so many possibilities into linear comic book storytelling? Do you feel like is it more like a superhero, more like license? Kind of where does it live on that spectrum?
Well, in terms of the kind of boring logistical process on my end that nobody wants to hear about, it is a lot like license. It is a licensed comic, so we're working in a partnership with Paradox, who owns the IP, and we have a great relationship with them. They've been really supportive of the comic, and it's really wonderful when you can have that kind of relationship with the company that owns the IP, that they can be so excited about the work that we're doing, and it allows there to be a really good creative energy between the two. In terms of turning something that is, you know, a gaming world into a comic world, I think the role that I have played on this particular one is that I'm the one non-gamer on the team. I've never played RPGs. I have never played World of Darkness, and I kept it that way for this project specifically so that we could make sure that there was at least one person who had no idea what was going on, and so I needed to make sure that I could understand the comic just as a comic book fan, so that we can get more readers into the world, people who are not necessarily familiar with the world of vampire, but they love comic books, they love genre comics, they love horror, they love vampires. And so we wanted to get those fans invested in our comic book just because it's a great comic about vampires and this political world that they live in, while, you know, and take them and hopefully get them to get excited about the game, which honestly, I have to say, as someone that has never played RPGs, that actually kind of has happened to me a little bit on this project, because getting to watch these guys, particularly when we have kind of bigger brainstorming sessions with the creative team, all of whom have played before, watching them come up with the ideas for the characters and for the arcs and how they all communicate with each other, it really feels like I'm watching a live version of the game being played, because there's a lot of the same rules that go into creating the comic, in terms of like building your characters, figuring out what the campaign is, working together to do it all at the same time, and making sure everything sort of interlocks and plays against each other. It's really fun to watch that, and see that the experience playing the game and that kind of community that they've all built as game players really translates to the creative synergy that we've had on the comic. And it's been really fun to be a part of this team, because there's a collaboration between all aspects of it that I haven't really had on a lot of my other books that are of this ilk. So it's been a true pleasure to be a part of it.
Excellent. And that works as a perfect segue over to the Howards, our resident super fans, encyclopedias of all things vampire, the Masquerade. So opposite perspective here, right? You have lived in this world, you know it. What was it like for
Many
you on the
iterations
creative
of
side?
it.
Yeah, exactly. And we had a whole new rule book to play with here with V5. So Blake, as our, you know, resident storyteller who's run many games, what was that process like? The difference between running a game versus, you know, storytelling and comics?
I mean, you know, the interesting answer that I'm finding is that it's relatively similar, at least in terms of how I plan out chronicles and campaigns and stuff like that. I very much try to look at it, you know, in a lot of ways, you know, I could see how some people who play role-playing games might say that it's too structured and whatnot. And obviously, you know, when you're writing a story, you have complete control over what all of your characters do, as opposed to if you're, you know, running a game, player characters can very often take things into wild tangents that of course you have to account for. But then at the same time, you know, certain things come up in the process of writing things. You know, we get certain notes back that we weren't maybe expecting, or we decide later on that there's, you know, a more interesting way of doing something. So there's still a lot of that whole sort of pivoting and thinking on one's feet. But at the same time, you know, very much so, it's, you know, in the very beginning, you want to establish your setting and you want to establish your characters, and later on you just want to start throwing more and more things at them until you culminate into something that's, you know, sort of grand and epic. And in our case, you know, I think that would be with the sense of the two storylines kind of converging as the story goes on.
Yeah, so that's something that's very unique about this series, is that it is two interconnecting storylines, the Anarch Tales, which the two of you write, and then Winter's Teeth, which Tim Seeley writes. Maybe there's some chaos in there that's more akin to player characters, you know, making decisions. So I thought I would tee up all three of you to talk about that intersection, what it was like building two stories that are so interconnected, and then also at times feel so disparate, and just, you know, freebie here. Anybody who wants to jump in, you can talk about that.
Well, I collaborated with Tim before, so I knew what I was in for. in a really good way, you know. Like I had worked with Tim, I had written an arc of Hack Slash, and I knew that we had like really similar sensibilities in a way. So it was easy to collaborate with Tim. But I mean, that's what I think about. And with Blake, obviously it's easy to collaborate. I mean, I guess not every romantic relationship also makes for great collaborators, and that's okay. But ours does. We've really enjoyed working together on this. I mean, that's easy because we're both creative people, we're both writers. So we sit around the house and we come up with stuff. And there was that fun moment where it was like, well, how do we co-write this? What's our co-writing process? And it's like, it's a lot of sitting around and talking, just like when we sit and brainstorm things that never get written down because we're writers and that's what you do, right?
She's very invaluable when it comes to like kind of helping to rein in some of my thoughts and be like, okay, well, how would this idea work in like a comic book format, which, with all of her experience is like very, very useful.
Well, in real estate's a big thing too, right? Like with working with Tim, it's like he has so much of the issue, we have so much of the issue, and we have to make sure that, what's happening in our 8 pages is supporting the overall story of what Tim's doing without just retreading stuff we already know, and without just being the fun version you think you want to see, right? Like there's the idea that like, okay, we could just tell stories about a bunch of bad guys doing bad stuff. We already knew they did bad stuff in Tim's book, and we can just show you the bad stuff they did in our book. But that's not really the best way to approach, I think, building 2 narratives together. What it is it's more like Tim takes a step and then we take a step, and then Tim takes a step and we take a step. And all the while the reader is like, they're both walking us in the same direction. And it should be a little scary. So hopefully that feeling of both of us, or all 3 of us, both stories, all 3 of us, the reader should have the feeling that, we're taking them in a direction, and we know where we're all walking the same way, and you're a little scared if we're walking you into those woods over there.
Tim, anything to add?
I mean, I'm actually kind of from Tay's side of this because I actually have never played the game because when I was a kid, everybody wanted to play D&D or Shadowrun, and I couldn't find anybody to play a mopey goth game with me. So, but I did read the stuff, and so I was familiar. But for me, it's the invaluable sort of trove of knowledge that the Howards are, because I get the character stuff and I get the politics, but I'm not as familiar with mechanics and the rules. I'm terrible at rules, always have been. So, I can kind of say, well, I think the characters would do this, and then they can say, yeah, but that's not how that works. And Tay can say, yeah, that's not how that works. And then we'll figure out how to make it, so, sort of use the basic direction, but make sure the details are covered. So, and I'm also not good at details. Rules and details, terrible at both. But I can get
I love how this is just you saying all the things that you're bad at. But the story but volleyball, the story that
volleyball.
But I think it's important that the thing that you're the most strong at is character, because in these games, I mean, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're part of the most fun of being a part of a role-playing game is getting to invest yourself in the character that you're putting out there. And the whole way that these games are structured is, what would this character do in this situation? What would the character do now? What would they do now? What would they do now? And that's already how you think, and that's how the game is played. So I think that's part of why it's been such a really fun fit, is that there's nothing that we can't solve, because when you're coming at it from that character perspective, everything else you can kind of figure out. You can problem solve how to get around it, or how to find a new rule or a new way of doing it. But what's true to the character is true to the character, and that doesn't change. And that's very important to the game.
Well, I think another really cool thing about seeing Blake and Tim work together with character stuff is that Blake is really good as a storyteller about bringing in new players. Like most of the time when we play Vampire with friends, we're playing by and large with either people that were new or played for the first time with us. We don't tend to find a ton of other people to play with. We just, when we make friends with someone, we're just like, hey, instead of watching a vampire movie tonight, do we want to do a vampire story? Yeah, like we just talk our friends into it over time. And those people, I feel like, almost they have like really good character impulses because they're coming from outside of the world. And sure, like, a lot of people will be like, oh yeah, I want to play, Celine from Underworld. Like, that's fine. Like, people are going to do that, but the interiority of it like where like people that don't know the world bring in their own really unique and like special influences. Whereas like Blake and I have been so steeped in the world of darkness for such a long time. Sometimes when someone's like, what's a character? We're like, oh, it's this hyper political 15 level thing, who was born in this thing and whatever, and knows this guy, and they were a member of this tribe in the 1800s, whatever. Like we, you know, we have all this knowledge. Whereas like sometimes, like part of why I think Cecily and Ali work so well is because they're very much Tim's kind of thoughts about old world of darkness and new world of darkness as people, as real people. And it's kind of neat to see. It was like that Blake and Tim having that same thing that I've seen Blake have with so many new players to V5 and Vampire in general, which is like, no, you've got the story. Let me just show you how to tell it. Like,
and I think one of the great things too is that, you know, for as many rules and whatnot as there are to the world and the setting, and, you know, Paradox as licensors definitely want to sort of keep us on certain narrative paths. I would also say that they've, you know, they're pretty reasonable to work with in terms of like, you know, if we have ideas that are slightly unorthodox or slightly go against the grain, they'll, you know, push back on it in some regard, but at the same time also be like, but if you guys can make it work, you know,
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah.
Which I think is pretty cool.
It's been one of the like really refreshing things about working with them as a licensor is that their, you know, their job is to make sure that we're staying within the rules. That's their whole job, is they're, you know, making sure that we're staying within the brand and the rules that they've created. But every single person on their team, even in the licensing department, cares so much about character, and they all play the game too. And so whenever we pitch them something and they're like, this doesn't really work with the rules of the game, what we end up talking about is not, you know, it is actually not about rules, it's about character. And I explain to them like, well, this is what the character is going through. This is what we're going for. This is what we want the character to be feeling and the motivations that the character has. And they'll say, we love that. Here's how you can make that work and keep it within the rules. And I think it's a really fun relationship to have with them, because it's never a no. It's always a, this doesn't work right now. Try to tell us what you're doing and we'll help you get there. They always want us to get where we want to go, which is a really refreshing relationship to have with a licensor and licensed comics, let me tell you.
there is. I can also speak to that journey. You are correct.
I have two questions that have occurred to me listening to the answers, one for Nate and then one for Tim. So Blake and Tini, you mentioned real estate having so much of the comic. Nate, you've been tasked with the nearly impossible task of drawing an ensemble cast of characters in what amounts to typically 8 pages per issue. And as a reader, I can say you've done a phenomenal job, but I wanted you to maybe unpack how you approached the impossible task, ensemble cast, 8 pages.
Yeah, I did, going back to, you know, piggybacking off what they were just talking about, like character. This is all about, I really wanted to focus in on, and I think the first script was already, I think the first issue was already done, and I saw, you know, I was reading, you know, I read through it and I think this is amazing, and then like, hey, we have this 8-page thing that's going to go, and so I read it and I was like, okay, Sicily, and then, you know, reading from Priscilla to Rat King, and then reading how like the background stories from the Vietnam War, and I was like, I'm all about this. I get to jump through time. I get to play with all of these amazing timelines and amazing characters. And I think for me it was mainly just focusing on the characters and like making you love and care about them, because that's the core of, you know, the RPG itself, is like the care about your character and what happens in this world of, like, you know, I was pretty ignorant to the rules of this world, and like I knew of Vampire, but I didn't know like how many layers there were to all of this. So that was really cool to like pick Blake's brain about, like, you know, well, what would they do here and what would happen here, and, you know, this Nosferatu type of vampire, how would he stand, you know, things like that. So I think it was just going back to the question, just the characters. I just really wanted to like focus in on characters and let them, you know, drive the story.
Well, you've done it. From design to character acting, it's incredible how much story we get out of those 8 pages, and some of those character designs, like King Rat, are iconic. Like, they, you know, he'll be in my head forever. So when it comes to translating, picking Blake's brain and translating that into visuals, you have absolutely stuck the landing. Tim, the question that I wanted to throw your way comes off of the kind of like having that freedom to do some daring stuff. Minneapolis, St. Paul, the setting for Winter's Teeth and for your characters specifically this is the first canonical exploration of those cities in Vampire the Masquerade. And I just kind of wanted to hear how you went about exploring that space in a comic, taking something that's real, a real place, and then fictionalizing it and making it feel so lived in and accessible right now through, this crazy rule set and RPG lens.
Good question. So I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, and I moved from there, and I went to college. I went westward. I went to Eau Claire, which is about an hour and a half outside the Twin Cities. So the Twin Cities was the first city I really went to, myself. And I ended up moving there. I lived there for 2.5 years. And so I was a country kid when I first moved there when I was 22 or whatever. And so it was kind of scary to me. Like I remember the first time I drove downtown, I was white knuckling my steering wheel and now I live in Chicago. I lived there for 20 years. So Minneapolis is like going to the country for me. But I try to remember what I used to think of Minneapolis, what I thought was in those dark corners. And, when I was driving around downtown, and one of the most amazing thing about Minneapolis is that it is so interior. Like they actually try to make a city that you don't have to go outside because it's Minnesota, for God's sake. And so, they have these walkways above the street of which you can never go down to the ground level. So you don't have to go outside and deal with the hoi polloi in their heavy sweaters. Like it's that kind of, I just try to explore and extrapolate those things that I remembered about Minneapolis into something that I thought would work for a population of vampires. It's also two cities that are drastically different, even though they're right next to each other. Minneapolis is kind of newer and sort of hipper, and St. Paul is the old gray lady comparatively, and so it totally made sense for how the way that the vampire world was set up, that the Camarilla would of course set up in St. Paul, of course they would, and that there would be this sort of upstart element in Minneapolis, because of course there would be. And so just trying to extrapolate those things about that place into those elements, I think it was really fun, and I'm glad we picked a place I had been and was very familiar with, because I think it'd be hard to write vampire from a place you had no idea about. Because it's so much about setting there, and every town has a different sort of thing, and we really wanted to do the sort of idea of this almost like two princes. Like there's one city with one prince, but there's this urge to sort of separate them and have it, and that's the tension that keeps our game going, which or our comic in this case, that there's always this tension that this could be two cities, and that's also the tension of Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, that these things are not the same. Why are we always together?
Well, that all comes through very clearly, and I have a follow-up question, but I know that Tay has to leave for another panel, so just wanted to give her a chance to say farewell.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I love this comic. Vampire's amazing. You're all amazing. I gotta go. Bye.
Bye, Tay. So it seems like duality is at the heart of this, right? You've got two characters, Cicely and Allie, representing old and new. The Vampire the Masquerade RPG came to prominence in the 90s. V5 came out, just a few years ago. We have the canonical main story, Tim, that you're writing. We have the Anarch Tales that Tini and Blake are writing. So there's all this duality at play, and I kind of wanted to dig into that a little bit and give you guys an opportunity to talk about that as like a theme and a motif, but also really importantly to just give you both a chance to kind of like distill what's your story about. If these are two sides of the same coin, what is Winter's Teeth? What is the Anarch's Tale for people who aren't familiar that, you know, might watch this and be like, hey, I really want to check out this comic. So Tim, take it away. What's Winter's Teeth about at its core? What's the story?
I mean, I think in the really, really distilled version, it's about assets, right? It's about vampires need something. They need blood, and they do all kinds of crazy stuff to have that. And then it rolls out into a system of haves and have-nots, which causes tension among all these different sort of groups of vampires trying to survive in the same place. So, you know, and then it all kind of comes down to this sort of having power, and having the more power, the more control. So, you know, it's really sort of this, and we've talked about this a little bit when we were working on the book, but like the main story is sort of just about that there's a system within this sort of blood capitalism that they work in that means that some people have to do things to survive that that they wouldn't have done when they were human. And now as vampires, it's like what kind of people did they turn out to be in this new system that they have to work in? They don't get a choice, right? They have to be part of this, you know, this trade for this one asset that they need to survive.
And then Tini, Blake, your story follows Anarchs, who totally, you know, rebuff the idea of the cast and the have to. So, you know, that's tell us about it.
Well, you know, going back to like the role-playing game itself, I think, you know, most players who play this game feel that they fall into it for one of two reasons. You know, one reason because they really like playing the political intrigue, sort of, you know, wheeling and dealing, doing favors for the prince, or, you know, plotting against the sheriff. And then the other half enjoy playing it because they really like asking the questions of like, okay, well, what would life be like for me if I were a vampire? How would I sleep during the day in my bedroom and make sure that all the like windows are like completely covered up? You know, how would I need to get a job? Just basic things like that. And I think that is what we really wanted to sort of explore with the Anarch Tales, to sort of make it more, I don't necessarily want to say mundane, but really more about like just the sort of basic struggles, especially in like the first volume. So much of it goes back into like the various characters' backstories and how they became vampires themselves, and, you know, just how they operate just in the mundanity of, you know, of the modern world. Like how do you, as a relatively young person who's supposed to be immortal, like adapt to, you know, a world that's, you know, changing very rapidly, even for us who are, you know, currently living. It seems like, you know, in the past 20 years, there's been so much like drastic change over our culture that even we as regular people get whiplash. So sort of going and looking into it, being like, all right, well, you know, how does a person who has to drink blood every night to survive, how do they operate within this world, while at the same time also having to deal with this governing body of other vampires that sort of lords above them?
Excellent. Well, I know we're getting near to the end of our time, and I wanted to just let everyone know that Volume 1 is in stores now. Volume 2 will be out soon with some very cool announcements close on its heels. More to come that we're very excited about. Winter's Teeth has been a chart-topping comic, critically acclaimed. We're really excited about its expansion into the book trade, as after its, you know, first unlife in the direct market. And I thought, as a kind of capstone to all of this, one of the coolest elements of the series is that we have all of this RPG material, actual playable material in the back, and the trade collections collect all of that. So people who are venturing out to pick up Volume 1 and soon to pick up Volume 2 will get access to all this cool content that they can't get anywhere else. And Blake, since you have written all of that for us, I thought maybe you could just give people a quick little survey of what they can expect. That way, if you have die-hard Vampire the Masquerade fans watching, they can go, oh yeah, I absolutely have to go grab those 2 volumes.
Yeah, well, the easiest way of putting it is that, the idea is that you will read the story and you will love some of the characters presented into it, and you will love the way that the Twin Cities is structured as a game setting, and with a lot of the rules and game materials that we've tried to provide. We've endeavored to make it so that if you want, as a storyteller, to set your game in the Twin Cities, you have a plethora of non-playable characters that you can fully reference. If you see a character within the game using a really cool vampiric power or ability, we've tried to provide the rules for, okay, this is how you can do that within the game in accordance to the game rules. Basically just trying to really just fuse those 2 mediums together.
Well, I'm excited for everyone to be able to pick up volumes 1 and 2 and see and play, read and play. So thank you all so much. Nate, Tim, Tini, Blake, I appreciate you being on the panel. Thanks so much.